Hello and welcome to our podcast. This is Kasia.
I'm Kasia.
A couple of months ago, we started talking about our shared passions and interests, and from that, a project was born. Our passion project that we did over the summer on AI narratives. And we start this series to introduce to you how we think about it, what were our outcomes, and what was our process. So join us on this ride that we enjoyed immensely.
Yes, and today we're going to start with us and with our intuitions. But before we do it, we want to maybe dismantle what are AI narratives, because very often when we start talking about it, people ask like, okay, but what does it mean actually? First, those are like working definitions that we want to say this is what we used it for in our research, but it's not that we are here to define what a narrative is or what AI is, because there are scientists, researchers, academics doing that for years, so we don't want to even go into that. So a narrative is a story, however brief, that shows us how we perceive a certain phenomena and how this can have an impact on how this tool, technology, or whatnot develops into the future. So it tells us as a story, and it has some kind of a directionality and action. So this is like how we perceive, how we understand narratives in this project.
And for AI definition, we use a term called intersubjectivity. So instead of having, again, an academic definition, we want to use people's agreement on shared definition of this concept, something that we take for granted as a backup assumption. So it might be, of course, contested, but that's part of its narrative. So we go in this project through how we all define it and what sort of a tool it is, with questioning it along the way.
Exactly. Can you hear the dogs barking?
A little bit, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's like a whole, I think, party going on in the block, so sorry for that. I can't stop them. So this is how we understand it, and now we want to share also like our personal motivations or where we come from, so we know what is our positionality in this. So we're not claiming we're objective. We're definitely subjective. We have a lens that we look through onto the world. I myself come from like startup and tech innovation space. I've been working it for almost a decade now, and at first, I was very, very enthusiastic about it, coming from a very distant place, which is law. And when I came into this innovation and test startup space, I saw people were so welcoming and so happy to share ideas, experiences, and I thought, wow, this is very, very different from law students. But then after a few years, I grew disillusioned with that, even though it's still, I would say, quite a positive space. I would say there's also a lot of hype and sometimes ill-conceived innovations, and that there's this very much not really contested techno-solutionism mindset that anything can be solved with technology. And sometimes those technological innovations come into this place without any kind of consultations or understanding of a wider context. So the system, the institutions that have been working in there they're not taking into account. And years ago, when I did my bachelor's in law, I actually did a small research, a thesis on rights of robots based on sci-fi movies. So there was already some kind of a start to this, because it was about how stories influence the development of AI and where stories can lead us, like kind of with understanding today and the future. So that's about me. Kasia, do you want to go next?
Sure, and I also want to piggyback on your last comment, because I think that's what connected our perspectives. So for me, stories are also extremely important. I come from social sciences background, specifically anthropology. Anthropology of contemporary often talks about how all culture is language. So basically, even though there's a lot of material culture around you, like paintings, sculptures, the way we build cities and raise monuments, the language persists to be the one that perpetuates certain ideas that we then incorporate into life. And that seems to be the case with AI as well. So that was something that propelled me to go towards this topic together with you. This sense of how we first build stories and then build solutions within this mindset. I was really curious and hungry to incorporate social sciences into tech world, because in my personal path, I have seen them time and time again pushed aside and then coming back as sort of a pendulum. So as I mentioned, like my academic background is with sociology and anthropology, and I'm this rare case that actually started their corporate job within their educational field. So straight from there, I went to research, market research, user research, UX research. So I sort of lived through the iterations of that, with broader and broader introduction of software development into product sphere, as well as UX and tech in general into consumerism. And my observation has been that, like, both in academia and then in market, we see those fluctuations of more soft and more female skills first flooding a sphere and then being pushed aside, and then being re-evaluated as an important, and then pushed aside again with some more privileged sciences. And what I mean by that is, like, sociology had to fight for its place at the table with more established sciences back in the 19th century. Then qualitative methodologies in 20th century had to fight for their sit at the table, and analyzing texts and listening to people had to fight for their place in the discourse among social sciences, next to numbers and surveys. Then, like, UX research sort of trumped all market research knowledge, and like we were reinventing everything again and again. I think I picked up on that in what you were saying about how you perceive tech world. Those were the first sort of ideas or a common ground of a problem space that we wanted to venture on.
Yeah, so I would say that we're both kind of insiders in this world because we've been working in it, but also I feel sometimes being on the edge and kind of trying to look at it from a critical perspective. And that's what we've been doing with this research, and that's what we want to also share with you. What were our intuitions coming into this project? And what I want to also add that maybe I didn't voice, or we didn't voice in the beginning, is that we're doing this podcast to as one of our outputs, and to those of you listening, to kind of share our way of thinking, not only in a written format, but also in a spoken format. And sometimes it's just easier for some people to listen to someone than to read, and also to be able to come back to it maybe in a year or two and see what we were thinking, how we were thinking about certain things, and see what has changed or what was useful, maybe, because I feel like when you finish a project, and obviously you do lessons learned and kind of summary and, I don't know, presentation and whatnot, but then you will forget a lot of those insights or a lot of those ways of thinking throughout the project. And I think that's what we want to kind of save with this.
Yeah, I think we want to capture the nitty-gritty, right? Because as you said, like, those outputs are polished and they tell a story of, like, a refined finding, a refined reporting on some phenomena discovered. And then we all talk about how messy a design process is, or like a process of iteration is, but we rarely show the workshop. So that's what we want to show.
Yeah, but as you said, like refined, so like refined sugar, it's all like white, beautiful, and like glossy, and we want to show it the process of getting there, and also the things that maybe we thought didn't work or that were interesting, but we couldn't follow them because of time constraints. So kind of to share that with you and see maybe that starts other conversations. That would be awesome. Kasia?
Yeah, I just want, maybe before we dive into like specific hypotheses or intuitions that we had at the beginning, I would want to maybe list them because I think they were pretty clear and like pretty common to us both. So one of them, I think early on that we agreed upon is that like what you can see with an untrained eye right in front of you is this polarization between like hurrah optimism, people jumping on a bandwagon or even trying to steer the bandwagon, versus the naysayers, and this like tension between those two camps. And we, of course, were curious, like, is there more? Or do we tell ourselves more stories? Are we dragging AI into any other direction? Then the second thing was the technology, like the conversation and the development being steered and being overpowered with tech talk. And what about economy? What about social impact? What about actual? And
what about the planet?
Exactly. So like all of the impacts that go beyond programming. And then the third thing is like, is this an unprecedented revolution? Are there any other revolutions that happened before that we can actually take some learnings from and not jump to the same field mines while doing so? So like the third common agreement I think we had jumping in is like, wait a minute, like some of this actually sounds familiar already. So yeah, let's go through them.
Yeah, exactly. So first, definitely you can see with your bare eye. Do you say it, bare eye?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
That they're like techno-optimists, techno-solutionists, people who are very much into, yeah, technology is going to save the world, AI will save the world, or even if it's not going to save the world, that's going to make a lot of money to the shareholders. And that's optimistic. That's great. That's awesome. And then there's like the techno-pessimists, people who criticize AI for, I don't know, a lot of energy consumption or water consumption. How big companies who are working on it, their CO2 emissions and their energy consumption have gone by 2 digits the last few years when they were working on LLMs, right? So this is very polarizing, and we see that people seem to be on one side or the other.
And I also feel like people only are faced with this choice. Like they feel they have to choose on which side they are, which is a daunting task, because like you're either going to perpetuate what AI is doing or stand aside, which is also a choice that is difficult to make. And that's why we wanted to look in deeper. And then also challenge this assumption that it's a very binary narrative only, because there is this wider trend of data influence and like digits influencing us back and bit influencing us back, that we tend to take any subject in those matters because not only we are training algorithms are training us, and like we tend to 0 and 1 a lot of situations. So like this is part of the critical thinking that you mentioned. So it's not only finding others, but also like stepping back for a second and saying, let's recognize that we're trying to black and white this thing, and maybe it doesn't have to be like that.
Yeah, and that's great. And many places it has an impact on, as we said, on the planet, on the society. Those impacts can be both positive and negative.
People feel pressure to making that choice, and like, let's recognize it's a fake choice that we sort of like recreate from machines instead of actually making it more gray.
And what I wanted to say is that, it can both be, it can be both positive and negative at the same time for the society. And what I would like to invite to this discussion, or to our research that we did, it is also about talking about wider structures, so the government, the institutions, the NGOs, etc., who can play which role. And it's not only about, the technology is on its own and it's going to do this or that. The technology doesn't do anything by its own, right? The technology is guided by, these massive companies, but also other players in the scene. And we can do something about it. Obviously, some people have more power and some people have less, but still, it's a discussion and the choice that we can make. And that's part of why we wanted to look into that.
And I think like one other phenomena that we pretty quickly realized is that it's not only about this this black and white thinking. It's also part of a coping mechanism of dealing with a big change. So both rejection and like hurrah, optimism and acceptance can be a part of mourning, but it can be a part of coping with change as well. So you don't have to treat them as are there alternatives to your identity moving forward. You can treat them as steps in the process of dealing with a significant shift.
For sure. And one last thing I wanted to add here is what we discussed a lot as well. Is like, one is what it's kind of prescriptive. It's about the future. It's something that could happen or we are promised to happen, and then the rest is descriptive. So what AI as a technology can actually do today. And I think what sums it really well, and it's like bait and switch kind of situation that happens here, is a quote by Signal President Meredith Whittaker, who said, AI is promising God and delivering email prompts. So we're really like thinking about what will happen, how it will change, etc. But then in real life, we see, yeah, it's changing my work. But can we actually believe from what we're seeing that's like, yeah, literally like email prompts or faster research or whatnot, can it get to this place that people are talking about? And I think there's like a bit of a disbelief there because it's sometimes difficult to do this jump between those.
There's also this very viral quote by Joanna Maciejewska saying, I want AI to do my laundry and dishes and not art and writing. And I think that also represents this want of like, yeah, let's use it, but maybe let's not treat it as either or. And I think like it's also important to voice that the way we connected and actually decided to do this project before even finding out we have similar intuitions or overlap in our positionality is a very hands-on task that we bonded over. It's actually using an AI assistant to do the nitty-gritty and like also the very mundane part of user research within the design process. And we bonded over like basically making our lives easier with tool here and now and not the grand sci-fi version of reality.
Yeah, I think we were like going in between this and the sci-fi because it's somewhere in between, and I'm zooming in, zooming out, and I think this is definitely something exciting to do it this way, to see what it can do today and where it can go.
I think we also pretty naturally started moving into the second point that we were more or less sure of, that like the discourse around AI is disproportionately covering the technical issues and the technology. I think we pretty quickly discovered that the talk is overproportionately focusing on tech as a subject and like technical solutions. And then the second sort of subject it jumps into is economy. But what about social impact? What about cultural impact, structural, societal changes, and planet as a whole? Are we talking about it? Is it more or less visible? Are we lacking some stories to be told? That seemed very intriguing.
Yeah, and I would add to that obviously we're not saying that their discussion is not happening, but is it in the right places, or how can we make it more inclusive and also like wider and bigger and more mainstream? Because we also see, apart from the wider perspective, but also on an individual level, we see a lot of how AI influences people's moods and how people feel, so the emotions. One of the studies that we found in the Ipsos AI Monitor says that nearly 4 in 10 people think AI will replace their jobs in the lifespan, and that they feel dread, they feel anxiety related to that. There are, though, more than half that are excited for products and services that use AI. So there are lots of emotions around it. There's another study by Mohammed Al-Khilafat, sorry for mispronouncing it, which shows that 96% of participants experience the fear of death related to the rapid advancement in AI. So depending on the study, we see there are definitely like a lot of people who see it and they experience some kind of fear, anxiety, something that's definitely not pushing them to to look for solutions or look for good in it. It's more of this feeling that makes you sit on a stool or on an armchair and be like, okay, what's next, right? So this illusionment or this lack of power.
If we only talk about tech and possibly economic outcomes, we not only shape how, in what format, in what context we will develop AI, but we also shape how people understand and perceive AI and its application. So those fears, those emotions, they come from how people are able to reason and tell themselves a story and understanding of AI. So if we don't introduce different stories that help you not only grasp those concepts, but also see their applicability and impact on social structure and planet ecosystem, we're not going to build people's perception around it, because that's where it's derived from.
Yeah, exactly. We wanted to see how the stories that we tell influence public understanding and acceptance of AI, and how it influences us on an individual level and like on the community level, society, and as we mentioned, the planet. So to see it from this, like, from one person to the whole, to everything.
The third pillar this project has is the patterns that we see in the whole discourse.
We wanted to see if AI is repeating what we've seen before, and that we see that, when we have shit in, then we have shit out, obviously, and we have the very biased content being put into the models, then we have a very biased answers, or that they are incorrect. We all know the examples of sexist comments being spat out by the models. Also, yesterday I saw, I think it was Perplexity, that produced ridiculous answers to things like, oh, can I use gas in the sense of gasoline to cook a soup or thing? And then said like, no, you can't, but you can use it for cooking pasta to make it more spicy. Or, just like ridiculous examples of just very, very incorrect pieces of shit, I would say, because you can't even call it information. So
but it doesn't have to be necessarily about accuracy only, like the absolutely hallucinating, like you mentioned, like I was conversing with one of the AI chatbots yesterday and asking for female-oriented naming, and it was super sexist. Like, it wasn't female in a sense of like feminism and DEI. It was really like this pink 90s type of female representation. So it just goes to show how much of that, like what way it is, what way it has still in the languages at large, even though we try to push the discourse a different direction within the last quarter of the century, right?
Exactly, and some of those will be realized biases. So let's see if we look at let's face this model that is supposed to recognize us, and if it has a balanced amount of people with different races, that's I would say quite a realized bias, or realized, and we have this understanding it has to be balanced. But then there are also these biases that are hidden or that are not realized, right? So things that we don't know. I think those are the most vicious and also interesting and spicy things that come up, that we might not know how many of those are still hidden there, and that they are difficult to tackle because they have been with us for such a long time that it's difficult to go with that. To that, I would add that we have, because the tech world is so populated with male engineers, business people, whoever, white male usually. So there's this perspective. So those are their perspectives that are governing this field, but also there's this assumption that male perspective is neutral, and that whatever comes in that's diverse, that's not serious enough. And I think that there's some, like Linda Nochlin, who is who actually studied art and female history of art, and also P.L. Thomas, who is like a professor of education. They both share that view that objectivity frames a white male subjectivity as a norm.
I think what you mentioned is extremely important and requires a lot of work to undo. And I even would suggest looking not only in the data sets that are biased and that are replicating the patriarchal culture, of course, but this is relatively catchable and detectable, and we can actually put in prompts, instruction, testing in place to surface those uneven representation and those patterns. But what about actual humans who sit at the developing table and like are making decisions and are steering the direction and are deciding who to invite to the conversation, like not only moderating the direction of it, but actually including versus excluding certain competences, certain folks, and so on. And I think this is something that is super hard to grasp because it's just human nature, and because it's not as quantifiable. It just feels, as you said, objective. It feels neutral. It feels the way it should be done.
When we came to this project, we both also saw that this Silicon Valley narrative are about move fast, break things, or, you know, do something and ask for permission later, etc. This is ask for forgiveness, not for permission. And this idea that, you know, it's about being fast and furious and being there first and shipping something that doesn't necessarily work well or has all those biases in place. It's okay. It's part of the process.
And it's the way it should be done.
Exactly. Because that's how you learn, etc., etc. I know it because we both know it because we've been working in technology for a long time. But people who haven't, you know, for them, maybe it's like, oh, wow, this shouldn't be this way, right? Or why is it happening? Or even what's more concerning is that they don't know about this idea or narrative that it should be this way. So they believe what they see. They believe the outcomes of whatever ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity gives them.
And I think it also becomes this like axiomat or a law of the land now that it has to be fast. One of the EU documents regarding next steps beyond like the AI Act is that we face this crisis of the need to move fast versus the academia way of doing things that is slow. And it's so mind-blowing to me and like so interesting in a sense of like analyzing language and models that this like Silicon Valley idea found its way to like EU reporting as well. EU tends to be this counterweight to American way of doing things in terms of regulation and so on, and it's often juxtaposed. And right now, this like undeniable truth, it seems like, of that we have to move fast, is used as an argument against analytical academic approach because we don't have time for it. We need to move.
It's there obviously because also Sam Altman just before or after launching ChatGPT, he was doing a tour around Europe and also visited Poland and Warsaw and gave a talk and like all around Europe. Why was he doing that? Well, to influence the legislation and to make Europe more open or less restrictive for him, right, and for his organization. What comes to me now also when we talk about being fast, because that's like how business works, right? Academia and governments are supposed to be the balancing force here, to be slower, but there's a reason for that, to think those things through. And if AI is really this revolution, evolution, or whatnot, should we be moving that fast?
Yes, exactly.
If we say that's going to change everything, well, that we should be preparing, like we should be doing things maybe more thoroughly and think those things through and not be like, okay, fast, because it's the business that needs it or says it needs it, or that's the way it should be. And
I think there's a lot of fallacy in this concept of speed. Also because if you look back on not on like the conversation around solutions and launches, but actual problems. I remember you mentioning to me a colleague of yours that 10 years ago was studying AI, right? Like, it's not that those concepts didn't exist and are just like are a meteor that just landed in our common sphere out of nowhere. Like, we've been preparing for this. Like, we've been trying to deal with it through sci-fi, through academia, through then inventions. So it's not like we haven't been rationalizing, we haven't been conscious of that problem space. It's just that the velocity of software development tends to overpower our way of thinking about how we should progress. So the solutionism versus, like, the phrase that comes to mind is like lean left. So lean into the problem space before you lean to a solution. So, like, really understand what the brief is, like what's the problem we're trying to solve, and once we define that, then we can jump to solutions instead of defining the problem, defining the direction through the solution.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely AI has become this hammer that everyone is looking for nails to stitch in, right? Like, okay, I have the hammer. What do I do with it? And I think because of that, people feel anxious or feel lost or feel left behind because they're like, okay, can I hold the hammer? If I do, what's the hammer I should hold? Is it like, ChatGPT, or is it other tools? What's there? It's so vast, and it feels like, kind of a pill that can solve all your problems. But
I think we were thinking the same thing 20 years ago about internet. We entered the sphere of digitalization with, like, all those grand ideas, and now we know the mental health costs. We know the, like, community impact it has, the loneliness epidemic. We also know about Arab Spring. We know about Me Too, like all the good it can bring. We know about the cultural impacts of content creators and so on, right? Like, it has shifted things. It has put people in and out of work. It also is, to a degree, more narrow than the grand ideas we had 20 years ago and the hopes. And it is steered to a degree by business application and so on, right? So I think it is worth, as we mentioned, looking into, like, how did we deal with moving fast with Wild West? How did we deal with moving fast with transforming the media and so on, right? And how can we apply those learnings to moving fast or moving steady here?
Yeah, I think definitely, like, we should be learning from the past about, like, on our or people's mistakes, but I think that's not what we as humans like doing in general. Because that's painful, and it's also, like, telling us to stop somewhere or not do certain things.
Yeah, but I think it's also more hopeful to, like, imagine the history of humankind being a spiral that actually goes up a little bit instead of just in circles and repeating ourselves constantly. At least that's what makes me hopeful. I stole that line from Jon Stewart from The Daily Show, but I feel it's the outlook that keeps me hopeful about the future and keeps me interested in future design as an impactful means of developing the world we live in.
Beautiful. I mean, I would add that hope was also a word that connected us, and that was there from the beginning, and something that I have been asking people for the past almost 2 years now, starting with my master's degree that I did, strategic design and complexity, which was basically about many things that we discussed today. Wider impact of changes, not only technology, but societal changes, and, like, how we should look at this from a systemic point of view, and how I was asking our teachers or guest lecturers about how they keep hope moving forward, working on topics like prisons or nuclear, the nuking, basically.
Weapons, nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Also about AI and how they keep hope working on those difficult topics. And that has been my personal journey as well, like how to keep hope in this moving world that is so fast and so brutal. Or maybe it's not that brutal, it's just like the stories that we hear and tell ourselves.
Maybe it's not
about
that fast either.
Exactly. So this is where we united, and this is where I think we'll be ending now.
Join us next time when we will show you the nitty-gritty of actually finding those other narratives than doom and hurrah, and how messy it can get and how engaging it can get, and how to make AI work for you within that process.
Exactly. And then, of course, I'm going to do the usual stuff, like you can subscribe and rate and review the podcast. It's a very new podcast, obviously. It's going to be a very short one. But you can also just reach out to us if you found it interesting. It would be lovely to hear from you. So thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Ciao.